Thanks to Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring this excessively long video.
Yakten Saiban,
or Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, was a niche little lawyer simulator that came out in Japan in the early 2000s, with Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, Justice for All, and Trials and Tribulations releasing originally in 2001, 2002, and 2004 respectively. It was originally ported and remastered on the Nintendo DS in America, with their first 3 games coming out in 2005, 2006, and 2007, with Apollo Justice Ace Attorney hitting Western shelves in 2008. After a long 5-year hiatus, we were given the 3DS digital-only versions of Dual Destinies in 2013, and 1 year later in 2016, American players got Spirit of Justice, also digital-only. In total, the entire series has sold over 6.1 million copies worldwide since 2001, and while that isn't a massive success as much as it was a slow burn, it really speaks to the popularity of such a weird little game. It began at the turn of the millennium, when a Japanese game developer, Shu Takumi, had been working at Capcom for a while alongside Hideki Kamiya, and assisted in the production of Resident Evil 2 before it was scrapped and redesigned, as well as being the director for Dino Crisis 1 and 2. After Dino Crisis 2 was finished, Takumi was told he could use his small team of 7 people to make literally whatever game he wanted. He thought about making a detective-themed visual novel which would allow for deductive reasoning to be used as a gameplay mechanic. He initially thought about making a game centered around a joint reasoning system, which would have the player correcting a detective's mistakes, but he ended up settling on the idea of a court system which would have the player control a lawyer who points out contradictions between witness testimony and evidence, a concept which formed the basis of the Ace Attorney series and took his small team only 10 months to construct on a shoestring budget. He originally wanted to make the game on the Game Boy Color, but after seeing a demo of Mega Man Battle Network on a prototype Game Boy Advance, his team eagerly moved to that platform instead. He made the first 3 games as well as Apollo Justice before going on to create the equally brilliant game Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. The reason I chose to open with the history of the series is because for the longest time, Phoenix Wright was a relatively inaccessible gem that people couldn't hope to play unless they happened to own a Nintendo DS. And as a teenager who mostly sat in his bedroom in front of his TV, having to play on a handheld when I have this big, beautiful flat screen felt like squandered potential. Since then, it's been released on the Wii and iOS as a free-to-play game with in-app purchases to buy the other titles, as well as the Phoenix Wright Trilogy on 3DS. But it still felt like something was missing. The iOS version itself is really bizarre, because it's perfectly serviceable if you're looking to play the series and experience the music and story, but on top of the HUD flickering on and off and the animations feeling like they play at 15 frames per second, the text crawl also takes forever. Luckily, by the end of 2018, we got an official announcement from Capcom that the first 3 Phoenix Wright games would be remastered for Steam, Xbox One, PS4, and Nintendo Switch, and I was absolutely ecstatic. Not only would I be able to capture footage of the series in the best graphical quality possible, but I'd be able to recommend it to people without saying, oh, also, yeah, you need a DS or an emulator. It's kind of like my Monster Hunter argument, where sure, this game is exceptionally good, but if it's on older technology, most people will just pass in order to avoid the inconvenience. The point of this video is to try and convince you to play the Phoenix Wright trilogy without spoiling it for you. Well, kinda. People are really weird about spoilers. They'll insist on not having something spoiled for them in the event that they want to experience the game blind for themselves, and then they'll just sit on their ass and never play it. Ever. So allow me to extend an olive branch. I'm going to cover the first episode and a little bit of the second in an attempt to compel you to purchase the game and see for yourself how it ends, at which point you can stop the video and go play it, or choose to keep watching if you want more information and context at the risk of seeing some very mild spoilers. Trust me when I say that the stuff I'll be covering in this video is only skimming the surface of what makes this series so exceptional. I'll be showing inconsequential moments, but I refuse to show any huge plot spoilers that might take away from any memorable moments that are sure to leave a lasting impression on any new players, in the same way they did on me when I played the original series more than a decade ago. Firstly, Phoenix Wright is a visual novel in which you take control of, well, Phoenix Wright, a rookie defense attorney who lacks confidence and honestly just figures things out as he goes along. No, not one of those visual novels where you witness a pathetic virgin devoid of personality get chased by a harem of schoolgirls and having to make a decision as to who he should date. It's more like an interactive detective game with logical puzzles that require the player to retain information, predict plot twists, and find contradictions in the witness's testimony. But in order to do that, you have to be okay with doing a lot of reading. This is aided by highly entertaining and oftentimes emotional expressions worn on the faces of the colorful cast you'll encounter throughout the games. So it's not the same thing as just sitting down and reading a book. You could technically just scroll through the wiki and glean all the basic information, but to do so would rob you of all the details that bring Phoenix Wright from a passable story to a heartfelt, emotional journey. It also has a phenomenal soundtrack, despite consisting of a bunch of low-quality audio samples, primarily because the compositional philosophy exercised by Masakazu Sugimori during the writing of the score is so absolutely genius and tense that it elevates the experience to an unforgettable level, which I'll cover in depth momentarily. If you're new to my channel, I have a passion for deconstructing the emotion of a song and talking about specific details and how it fits into the game's context, so if that's something you're into, then check out a lot of my other videos which usually follow a similar format. I think it's a game that appeals to both male and female players alike, since guys will gravitate towards the satisfying legal action, and girls will undoubtedly adore the colorful cast of quirky, cute characters.
Are you saying there's only two genders?
No, that is not what I was saying. No, please, stop! I've shown the game to a number of my friends, and even the most jaded of comedians have trouble reading through the cleverly translated dialogue without cracking a smile. Partly because while the game takes itself seriously when it needs to, it does so in between moments of levity and goofiness. Your partner Maya, for example, is a spirit medium in training, meaning she can conjure ghosts and other occult stuff like that. So you'd think she'd be this extremely serious, stoic character, but she's actually an absolute doofus that loves burgers and children's cartoon shows and annoying Phoenix while he's trying to conduct investigations. And yeah, the game follows the CSI formula, in which, despite just being a lawyer, Phoenix will often illegally obtain secret evidence taken from crime scenes to pull out later in court when he's backed into a corner and needs to expose a bold-faced lie. It's not authentic or accurate by any degree. Witnesses will shout out from the sidelines and not be held in contempt of court. They can throw objects at you with no fear of incarceration. Prosecutors can throw cups of coffee at you, whip you with a whip that they're somehow allowed to bring into the courtroom, and the judge will often be swayed by attractive women and penalize you excessively for simply cross-examining the witness and doing your job. But it's a wacky Japanese video game, and it's fully aware of that. That's half the fun. If you want a humorous breakdown of the many fallacious plot points present in the first case, Legal Eagle did a nice video talking about a lot of the misconceptions, while also educating people about the American legal system.
So he is on his first day as an attorney, and he's giving an argument in a trial. That's pretty crazy. Trials take months, sometimes years, to litigate, and you would never start on day one giving an argument as a new attorney. That's not something that should ever happen. If it does, something went terribly, terribly wrong.
I know what I'm getting myself into, boss.
Do you?
But how will I convince the judge?
Do you not have any evidence at this point? Have you not spoken to your client?
Are you serious?
Shut up! Shut up!
Would be all over it.
General, that's good advice. Just tell your client to shut up.
Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's proceed to the first episode, aptly named The First Turnabout. We're presented with the opening, showcasing the scene of the crime and showing the player who the killer is right off the bat. This is a formality, as the first case of every Phoenix Wright game is always painfully easy, and serves as the tutorial for players who might be picking up the game as their first. We see him having bludgeoned a young woman with a statue, before recalling seeing a young man and proclaiming that he'll frame him as the real killer, serving as brief plot establishment, so players have a goal in mind. We hear Phoenix's inner monologue as he tries to steel himself for the ensuing court case, when we're introduced to Mia, whom Phoenix explains is his mentor. She gives him a little bit of a pep talk, and he explains that the witness is his childhood friend, before Larry is introduced as he screams about how he's going to receive the death penalty. His overreaction is appropriate, but nonetheless comical. Phoenix introduces himself in a monologue, reiterates the information for the player, and then introduces Larry Butts, mentioning his school had a saying, "When something smells, it's usually the butts," before insisting that he's a good guy that he's going to defend from this baseless accusation. We're introduced to the judge and the opposing prosecutor, before Phoenix stammers and makes it very clear that he's a novice and lacks experience. The judge refreshes your memory by asking you some basic details about the case to establish your understanding of the defendant, the crime, and the victim. You can already see that the game is giving you plenty of silly, incorrect options, like suggesting that your mentor is the defendant, or that Cindy Stone's name is actually Cinderblock, a pun based on the fact that she died of blunt trauma. So already we can see the tone the game is setting. After the judge reassures Phoenix, we can see from his animations that the character you'll be playing for the next 3 games is a highly relatable everyman, much in the same way most people playing the game would be feeling were they to take on their first criminal trial in real life. We're then introduced to the Poindexter ironically named Winston Payne, who is a complete blowhard that even gets lampooned in the court record as someone who lacks presence. This will be even more clear when you hear his voice. Larry takes the stand, and the prosecution immediately begins riling him up by reminding him that he was dumped and cheated on, which leads to him getting hot under the collar. You have the opportunity to try and stop him, but it doesn't make much of a difference because Larry will speak regardless and incriminate himself. The prosecution calls its first witness, known to the player to be the true killer mainly due to his hairstyle, bindi, and salmon-colored suit. He begins his testimony saying he's a door-to-door magazine salesman who sees Larry fleeing the scene of the crime, and that he saw the victim dead in her apartment before hearing the time and making an emergency phone call to the authorities. Mia prompts you on how cross-examinations work, in which you can press the witness for more information that can potentially uncover lies, and present evidence to expose contradictions. If I can cut away for just a moment, a common trend that will definitely help you in future episodes is that witnesses have a tendency to say one very specific detail with the utmost confidence, almost like the game is trying to spell out to you that this one statement stands out more than the others. Should you fail to point out a contradiction, you'll be penalized for your mistake. Too many mistakes and your client will be declared guilty. This is easily circumvented, however, as you can save literally as many times as you'd like with up to 10 slots, which makes some of the occasional leaps of logic less frustrating, as you're able to just save before risking any guesses. But if you decide to get the game and still find yourself stuck and wondering where to go next in order to progress, I recommend Strategy Wiki, as they have a guide for each and every game in the series. I want to stress that staring at a guide the entire time is ill-advised, since the appeal of the game is using your own wits to move the plot forward. So I advise newcomers to exhaust all of their options first before resorting to a walkthrough, as it will be a much more memorable experience as a result. Before I get back to the story, I'd like to point out the excellent soundtrack that elevates this game to a demigod-like experience. It was originally scored on the Game Boy Advance with all of the compositional limitations that come with having only 6 audio channels. That's already a lot of space for the lead instrument, bass line, percussion, and any accompanying instruments for punctuation, such as a drum snare or little twinkling synths to emphasize a certain mood. But moreover, the GBA had a similar sound to the original Game Boy, in which even the most riveting of music would still be accompanied by a very electronic buzzing quality that makes for unpleasant playback on a pair of headphones or computer speakers, and often has the harmony cut out in order to play the dialogue sound effects. When the game was remastered for the Nintendo DS, the audio quality was improved, but still a little bit low fidelity. This was cleaned up in the transition to modern consoles, as the team would take the same music and add a little bit of reverb. It's very hard to tell the difference unless you've got an ear for good audio quality, but trust me when I say it's better than it's ever been, despite originally being based on the GBA sound chip, and I think it's a testament to the composition's competence that it still holds up almost 20 years later. The visuals are also extremely faithful to the original, minus some somewhat flat-looking colors due to the compressed images they're based on, but they make up for this with more detail in the art, most notably little things like eye detail. Maya looks extra cute when she looks at you with those big, almost sparkling anime eyes, and I noticed other things later like Edgeworth's pupils quivering in fear when you catch him off guard. But differences aside, the actual compositions are very nice. You have Courtroom Lobby Beginning Overture, which is just a steady drumbeat with infrequent hi-hats and a rising melody, illustrating Phoenix's anxiety but ultimately his willingness to step up to the plate and defend the innocent in spite of his inexperience. Then we have the simple track known as Trial, which has a warm yet intimidating constitution, once again outfitted with an ascending melody that inspires confidence with plenty of spaced out and syncopated notes. Vibrato 2001 is a simple lead phrase playing over a consistent bass guitar, serving as a backing melody for percussion before some sustained chords play underneath them, serving to establish to the player that while the tedium of a cross-examination is routine, there's a lot on the line and that they can't make too many mistakes. Objection 2001 is a plucky, optimistic, upward ascending arpeggio, which has some really satisfying percussion for anyone fond of sporadic hi-hats. And it plays when Phoenix catches the witness lying on the stand, but the way it's executed is supremely satisfying. If you've seen Matthew Matosis's Mega Micro Minigames video, in which he briefly touches on Phoenix Wright, he makes a superb point about the timing and impact certain elements have on the punctuation of the critical moment. The interrogation music will be playing in the background as you press the witness. If you make a mistake, the music will keep playing, letting you know immediately you're on the wrong track, as Phoenix will make a vague blanket statement about the evidence contradicting the witness's testimony before swiftly receiving a small penalty and bracing himself for failure. But when you answer correctly, multiple things will happen. The music will cut abruptly, Phoenix will shout objection as the flashy graphic appears on screen, the camera will dramatically swing toward him with motion blur, he'll slam his hands on the desk, and the screen will flash, shake, or rumble, accompanied by sound effects and carefully spaced out text that helps the player visualize the speed at which the character would be speaking were there any voice acting. The music, which was cut once you answered correctly, will now come back at the crucial moment. The objection theme lets the player know they've got the killer on the ropes and that they just need to aggressively continue forward to ensure victory. But it's this means of delivering moments of action that makes the series so extremely satisfying.
Objection!
Additionally, Telling the Truth 2001 is a simple little melody that sets the stage for a verbal frontal assault, utilizing a harpsichord for the lead melody and a church organ as the bass line, like you're some righteous knight about to strike fear into the heart of evil. Anyway, back to the case. After piecing together the evidence and using them to expose the killer, you'll get to the most satisfying part of the trial, cornering the killer. I could explain the staccato nature of every piece of instrumentation in the song and the explosion of melodic detail, but it stands best on its own with context, so check it out for yourself.
Objection!
This happens in every single episode, in which you'll be interrogating someone and unmasking their deceptions before their body language immediately becomes defensive. And no, the footage you're seeing here isn't anything revealing. Literally 100% of the characters in Phoenix Wright react this way when caught in a lie, even if they haven't actually committed a crime. They'll often sweat, panic, or in rare cases, explode. It's hilariously over the top and yet intensely cool and satisfying at the same time, which is, for me at least, the part of the game I live for. In real life, people will usually just deny that they're lying, and there's very little you can do to elicit such a satisfying and overdramatic response. But how fun would it be if every time you caught someone in a lie, they started acting like they just got shot in the chest and are recoiling from the pain? After the hilarious conclusion, in which Mr. Sawit begins frothing at the mouth before collapsing, the judge hands down his verdict of not guilty to Larry, who is then showered with applause and confetti. Mia congratulates you on your first successful trial, and the camera turns to see Larry, who still has his dead ex-girlfriend and trust issues with which to contend. Every trial ends with a heartbroken or a concern unaddressed, giving Phoenix the opportunity to assuage the defendant's woes by presenting a single piece of evidence to make them realize they still have reason to go on. And while you can mess it up with no consequence, it's an extra little heartwarming addition to the conclusion of a happy ending if you get it right. The next segment is introduced with a grim cliffhanger that changes the entirety of the series. In the beginning of the second episode, Mia can be heard having a phone call with an unknown character, telling her she's going to be giving her the Thinker statue from the previous case, but that it will have important documents inside of it. And as Mia is established as being in her office, this opening plays out, eventually utilizing the synthetic-sounding song Suspense, which rises and falls with an ominous swell and minimal percussion. Phoenix arrives at the office moments later, only to find a heartbreaking scene and meet a new character under tragic circumstances. Phoenix begins his investigation, prompting the music Core 2001 to play. It immediately establishes the tone that something terrible has happened, but Phoenix must push onward and swallow his pain to find the truth. It has a nice strumming bass line that keeps the momentum steady, with a melody that represents Phoenix's mind racing as he scrambles to make sense of what just happened. After analyzing the crime scene and realizing the phone has been tampered with, he suddenly realizes he's been witnessed by a woman who's panicked while on the phone with the police. He continues talking to this new character, and after presenting her the receipt, she says, The next day, you visit her in the detention center and attempt to help her clear her name. Shortly after she recommends me as mentor, Marvin Grossberg, you pay him a visit intending to ask him to represent her, and this is the response you get. When you go back to talk to Maya about the exchange, this conversation occurs. As she realizes she's been abandoned by the only person she could count on, the most heartbreaking music begins playing, known as Heartbroken Maya. Masakazu Sugimori is an absolute genius in this regard, as he has the uncanny ability to compose beautifully bittersweet music that makes your soul want to cry. It also has a really nice B section that swells in intensity and strength before a high-pitched wind instrument is added, and the song loops back around to the beginning. When you talk to Detective Gumshoe, the detective who arrested Maya earlier, about retrieving her phone, he becomes suspicious of your intentions. When you have to give him a reason, you can choose to give it to him straight or give it to him not so straight. Not so straight involves you saying she wants her collectible phone strap back, while giving it to him straight has you realizing you can't tell him the truth before telling him that a girl's secrets are all kept on her phone, both of which result in Gumshoe handing over the phone without so much as a second thought. He then starts inadvertently giving you information about the case, effectively painting him as a complete idiot that isn't very good at his job. This is reinforced every time he's called as the first expert in any court case, and consistently makes mistakes that you have to rectify for him, as the prosecutor will often scold him and threaten to reduce his pay. His whole shtick is that he's a dumbass with a heart of gold who, despite being your opponent and trying to make life difficult for you, comes off as an excited little puppy dog who usually ends up coming to your rescue in a pinch when everything looks hopeless. I think he's actually my #1 favorite character, resulting from a combination of his absurdity, impulsiveness, and ultimately his resourcefulness, and it's unsurprising that he became a prominent major character in a future sequel. At this point, you decide to take on Maya's case, and you find out that you'll be facing off against Miles Edgeworth, Phoenix's estranged close childhood friend, and one of the best and most popular characters in the series, considering that he's a worthy rival to Phoenix and an incorrigible individual with his own set of pretentious quirks that makes him easy to hate during court, but also somewhat pitiful as a human being with a tragic past that you'll learn about in great detail in the 4th case. On a humorous side note, my girlfriend ended up getting the game and playing it with her group of friends, and every time Edgeworth came on screen, they made it a rule that they all have to clap. While I could go on and talk about the remainder of the episode and how satisfying it is to take down the pompous Red White and defend Maya, I'll leave that up to you should you decide to play it for yourself. But it really is a great case that left a strong impression for me in my teenage years, and ended on a note that always makes me emotional. I'm not really ashamed to say that Phoenix Wright is a soul-wrenching whirlwind of an experience, one that had me shed quite a number of tears due to my love and concern for all of these charming, well-intentioned characters. And it's really heartwarming to go on this journey in which you gradually understand what makes characters tick, which subsequently makes them feel all the more real. I'd like to take a moment to thank the exceptionally physically attractive folks at Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring this video. The main reason why I'm happy to work with them is that I deeply respect their commitment to creative freedom, by which I mean their leniency to let their sponsored parties say and do pretty much anything they want without censorship. We live in a world where making a pretty clearly satirical, sarcastic comment will get you publicly disbarred in a lot of groups, so I think it's cool that there exist advertisers who are humorous enough to allow for more avant-garde style of marketing. I've heard them on a lot of Bill Burr's Monday Morning podcast, as well as their hilarious partnership with my acquaintance Chris Raygun, and the fact that they're open-minded about how they let people do sponsorships means more to me than words can describe in this Orwellian cyber bubble in which we currently reside. Their official ads are so tongue-in-cheek and feature a lot of men who are as visually mediocre as myself, which is why I prefer not to show my horrendous face in my videos, and I think that gives them a nice edge in this hyper-polished world of advertising in which extremely attractive people line up to do something as tedious as audition for a mouthwash commercial. I've been using Dollar Shave Club ever since I had to start paying for my own razors, and I realized that the big-name shaving brands are kind of screwing you by charging upwards of $30 for a pack of refills. Usually what people do is use the same razor for as long as they can get away with, but with Dollar Shave Club you get a pack of refills for only a couple bucks a month, meaning there's no reason not to switch to a clean razor often. You can get their Shave Butter shaving cream, an ounce of their daily face cleanser, an executive razor handle, and 4 blade refills for just 5 smackaroonies. They also have a shave, oral care, and shower starter set, each for $5 as well. They help support the show, and I want to tell them how much I enjoy their products and business model, so if you want to help support the show, you can use the URL in the description below, or go to dollarshaveclub.com/chaseface to get started. And with that, let's get back to the video. If this video has compelled you to invest in the Phoenix Wright series, then I implore you to go buy it on any major modern consoles, like the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, or Steam, as previously mentioned. Unlike the Danganronpa series, which is overly flashy and serves to mainly appeal to the hardcore pop-punk otaku crowd that prefers spilling the blood and guts of a wide range of shallow characters instead of getting to know them on a deeper level, Phoenix Wright can literally be enjoyed by your parents if they're willing to look past the mild anime art style, which, in my opinion, is much more subdued than a lot of other games originating from Japan. I actually bought it on most consoles I own to show Capcom that I want them to make more Phoenix Wright, and I genuinely hope they remaster Apollo Justice, as well as Miles Edgeworth Ace Investigations, which has only been remastered on the iOS with new sprite art and a widescreen display, and I guess we could use a remaster of Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, even though I'm not a huge fan of the newer Phoenix Wright games, which lacked a lot of the emotional music that I came to love from the original trilogy, and instead just added more obnoxious characters that didn't really resonate with me, a detail I credit to the original creator Shu Takumi no longer being on board. And it goes without saying, of course, that we'd love a Western release of Miles Edgeworth Ace Investigations 2, which wasn't brought to the States as a result of the diminishing financial returns, but maybe they could remake the first and second games and package them together to earn back on their investment. They also made an anime that covers this exact trilogy in 2 seasons, if you prefer to just watch instead of play. But trust me when I say it lacks a lot of the emotional weight that comes with discovering the truth behind the mystery firsthand, and moves a little too quickly for my liking. For now, I'll be talking a bit more in depth about all the episodes from the trilogy if you'd like to hear it, it, and I'll once again abstain from spoiling anything major. So if you're interested in hearing more, then keep watching. But if you're about to go get the game yourself, it's a very reasonable $30 considering how many hours I've gotten out of it, and you'll enjoy the game more if you just go in blind and experience the fun yourself. It's hard to draw a line on what is and isn't a spoiler versus what one might consider to just be a pleasant little surprise. So if you have any trepidation about having something small ruined for you, just go play it. I'm telling you, it's really good. Your total playtime will undoubtedly be less than mine since I've logged more hours into it for the sake of recording and re-recording footage for this video, but most episodes take typically 2 or more hours to complete, with the final episode of each game on average clocking in at about 4 to 5 hours, assuming you're letting the natural text pace play out instead of just mashing the A button because you're a fast reader and you apparently have something to prove! The first game's 2 episodes, the first Turnabout and Turnabout Sisters, are excellent and establish a lot of backstory to set the stage for the Ace Attorney universe, although I really detested the 3rd episode, Turnabout Samurai, in which Maya's favorite kids show, The Steel Samurai, gets negative press coverage as a result of the actor Will Powers, who plays the part of the Steel Samurai, allegedly killing the villain of the show known as the Evil Magistrate, and you have to shield Powers from this accusation in court. I also got a really good laugh out of Maya's judgmental dialogue when she realizes Powers isn't the brave hero he's portrayed as on the show. This episode is a bit of a schlep, mostly due to the characters you interact with, such as Penny Nichols, a relatively docile stagehand who lacks any real presence or personality, an entertaining but obstructive little kid named Cody Hackins who sneaks into the studio and causes a lot of trouble, a sweaty neckbeard known as Sal Manella who communicates primarily in leet speak, and reminds you that this game was made in the early 2000s when 4chan memes were the cutting edge of entertainment, as well as, unfortunately, the most obnoxious character who will be returning in numerous episodes in every single game. Wendy Oldbag. Her traits include pretending she's still in her 20s, having a gigantic crush on Edgeworth, and spewing long-winded diatribes that were apparently obnoxious enough to make her a fan favorite in Japan. But the general consensus in America is that she's an obnoxious dickbag that blocks off the story in favor of her self-centered ramblings. I usually end up skipping her conversations because they don't end up really adding too much to the experience, but you'll unfortunately have to endure her in order to unearth some necessary evidence on your first playthrough. Episode 4, Turnabout Goodbyes, revolves around your friend Edgeworth being accused of murdering someone from his past, and as you approach and offer to defend him, he refuses, telling you to stay out of the case and leave him alone. As you dive deeper and learn about his past, it develops him into an extremely well-rounded character and has a lot of emotional twists and turns. Episode 5, Rise from the Ashes, has you assisting a young, aspiring forensic investigator, Emma Skye, to defend her sister, Lana Skye. But in a unique twist, Lana openly confesses to the crime and refuses to cooperate with you. And as you progress in the game, you'll discover a tight-lipped, years-old secret that divided the prosecutor's office to this day. This game wasn't originally in the first Game Boy Advance game, and was reworked with the DS's processing power in mind, allowing for plenty of 3D segments and a few new gameplay mechanics, such as luminol spray, which exposes DNA evidence like blood and fingerprints, the ability to reassemble broken objects in 3D, as well as a really impressive cutscene that has you speeding up and slowing down the footage to expose contradictions. I especially love the characters in this chapter, particularly Officer Meekins, a rookie police officer who is loyal to a fault, to the extent that as soon as he's wrongly accused of being a murderer, he just straight up believes it and tries as hard as he can to cooperate with the investigation. It also has a really brilliant opening that makes for a strong introduction. How do you visually present the idea that one woman was accused of murdering the same person in 2 different locations at the same time, while also foreshadowing 2 unfortunate past events? Well, like this. It also has the largest amount of evidence to present, making for a very complex and dynamic case to solve, with 36 pieces of evidence to sift through and present. But the highlight for me is always Damon Gaunt, the chief of police, being such a jovial and cheery character who has the extremely entertaining habit of just standing there and staring intently with a tight-lipped expression while the music fades out. Each case ends with a finale in which you get a sort of where are they now epilogue in order to tie up any loose ends for certain characters, as well as get an extremely heartwarming conclusion that will likely have you crying bittersweet tears if you're anything like the sentimental fool that I am, thanks in part to the game's tendency to show you a really sweet photo at the end, reminding you of the time you've spent with these precious characters. The ending music for each game is also very fulfilling and laid back, but I won't play it here because it's a special sort of moment that sticks with you. But they're the longest and most complex songs in the game. Most music in the game is a 1-minute loop, but the ending songs all clock in at around 4 minutes, with several different sections that add a lot of variety to the soundtrack. The second game, Phoenix Wright Justice for All, was in hindsight my least favorite game, primarily due to its musical accompaniment being the weakest at the time. After replaying it, I have newfound respect for it, but I think final case aside, it's a really forgettable experience overall. Not to mention the episode cards are really bare bones compared to the ones from the first game, possibly to make spoilers less obvious, but they partially reverse this in the third game, which looks much more polished in my opinion. The first episode, The Lost Turnabout, serves as a tedious and painful tutorial for players picking it up as their first Ace Attorney game, having the killer straight up attack Phoenix with a fire hydrant and inflict him with amnesia, so that the game can re-establish all of the important characters and game mechanics. All I remember is a vain idiot who mistakes a baseball glove for a bunch of bananas, and during the recording I was actually passing out from boredom to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore and just started skipping it altogether. There's a reason 4chan users rated it shit tier when ranking all of the Phoenix Wright cases, and I agree with them. Although Turnabout Big Top is way better than people give it credit for, so you can just ignore this little part right here. I don't necessarily want to paint people's opinions of the soundtrack in a negative way, so I won't be covering every track in depth, and I encourage people to come to their own conclusions and disagree with me. But the trial music, in my opinion, is some of the most lackluster music in the entire series next to Dual Destinies on the 3DS. The cornered music, Pressing Pursuit, doesn't have the same satisfying sense of justice and revenge that the other games do. It sounds like it's meant to establish dread and panic more than any sense of accomplishment, making all the twists and progression feel anticlimactic. Luckily, this was remedied in the song Hotline of Fate, which utilizes the introductory melody from Pressing Pursuit in a more appropriate context, in which the player is meant to feel an intense urgency. Compare this to Pressing Pursuit from Miles Edgeworth Ace Investigations, which has a bombastic air of finality and victory present throughout the entire track, as it undergoes several transformations before looping back around seamlessly, utilizing piano to reflect Edgeworth's graceful execution. Although I will admit that the victory music, Another Victory, is probably the best in the series. It feels like a beautiful angel descending from the heavens and planting a kiss on your forehead, as if to say, "Rest, my child, you are free." The second episode, Reunion and Turnabout, is also kind of tedious, as it deals almost exclusively with deceased spirits and the Fae school of channeling, with Maya once again being framed as the killer, a trope about which many Phoenix Wright fans like to poke fun. It also introduces the Psyche lock, which I had pronounced as Psych lock until very recently, before I noticed that the E turns it into Psyche, the human soul, mind, or spirit. It's used as a way to check that the player has been paying attention to the story and locks them out of progressing until they gather the necessary evidence, and it often pops up to reveal when a witness is hiding a well-guarded secret. It makes sense since the previous games would just have you present a piece of evidence before the person would just immediately confess to hiding information, whereas with the Psyche lock, you basically corner the witness until they have no choice but to confess, much like how how it would work in real life through interrogation. We also get introduced to Maya's cousin, Pearl, who actually grew on me throughout the course of the series, as well as Franziska von Karma, the daughter of Edgeworth's merciless mentor, Manfred von Karma. I find her to be a really annoying one-note character, whose main quirk is whipping people who show her disrespect, as well as calling people fool about 10 times in one sentence, but she gets a decent bit of redemption in the final case from the second and third games. She's actually a great source of comedy for people who find themselves laughing at sadistic slapstick, as is evident in the climax of one episode. The third episode, Turnabout Big Top, centers around a fabulous magician named Maximilian Galactica, accused of murdering his boss, the Ringmaster. It features a colorful crew of characters, including a ditzy but exceptionally attractive animal tamer named Regina, a manic-depressive clown named Mo who laughs at his own terrible jokes and then gets mad at people for not laughing with him, and also references the Fresh Prince at one point, and a ventriloquist named Ben and his dummy Triloquist. Get it? Ben Triloquist? Ventriloquist, who's docile without his dummy, but once he gets it back, it develops a personality of its own, even going so far as to punch Ben in the chin when he gets upset with him. By the way, if you ever check the Phoenix Wright wiki, there's actually a lot of interesting information about the characters' names and the etymology of them. A lot of people complain about this episode for reasons I can't begin to understand, citing it as the reason they stopped playing Justice for All, but I really enjoyed it, as Mo the Clown in particular provided a lot of laughs from his bad jokes followed by his depressed existential response. The story also has a really interesting and clever bit of misdirection once you finally get to the bottom of who killed the Ringmaster and for what purpose. Honestly, one of the more memorable cases in my book. The circus music as well is actually a really nice piece that includes the accordion, an instrument I've grown attached to hearing in video games, something I credit to Dark Cloud 2's amazing soundtrack. Not to mention Level 5, the creators of the Dark Cloud and Ni no Kuni duology, also went on to score the music for the Professor Layton series, which has plenty of that delicious accordion. Also, Level 5 made the Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright crossover game, which wasn't very good, but it's a thing. Just thought I'd mention that. The final episode of Justice for All, yeah, there's only 4 episodes in this one compared to the usual 5 on the other games, kind of a bummer. Farewell My Turnabout might just be the single best Phoenix Wright case in the entire franchise, a sentiment with which I'm glad 4chan agrees. Phoenix, Maya, and Pearl all get invited to a special Grand Prix known as the Hero of Heroes competition, held at the Gatewater Hotel, the setting of the first game's second episode, where an actor playing a character known as the Nickel Samurai was scheduled to give a speech after the ceremony, but in a turn of events, Matt on Guard, the character playing the Nickel Samurai, apparently becomes the suspect in the murder of his rival, the Jammin Ninja. Just before the ceremony starts, however, Maya is approached by a bellboy and told she has a phone call at the front desk. Not long after, Powers has a transceiver that the bellboy delivered for Phoenix, before Phoenix realizes Maya has been kidnapped for ransom. The demand? To get Matt on Guard a full acquittal. This is especially difficult for Phoenix, as he can't afford to lose Maya, but he also wouldn't be able to look himself in the mirror if he ended up defending a murderer. It's a curious situation, since Matt on Guard doesn't have a clear motive, and when Phoenix shows him the Magatama, which usually exposes someone's lies, he passes with no psyche locks in sight. It's also worth mentioning that Matt on Guard has a pretty decent guitar-centric theme song with a really melodic B section that I always find myself humming in my spare time. The thing that makes this such an amazing episode is the fact that many of the rival characters who had previously been in Phoenix's way all set aside their differences to help him out. Again, I won't spoil too much since it's best experienced firsthand, but it's extremely heartwarming to have everyone working together to get to the bottom of the kidnapping and help you recover your best friend. The writers have made Maya an extremely likable character in the series, so for them to use her against you and put her in genuine peril added so much tension to the stakes. One of his conditions is a full acquittal in one day, making Phoenix desperate and frantic to do everything in his power to make it happen. When he fails to do so, the judge's gavel, which usually sounds like this, ends up making a dramatically different impact, representing the grave nature of the situation in Phoenix's mind. The second game as an entire package is mediocre, but if we're just looking at the final case, then holy shit, it's a slam dunk. The third game, Trials and Tribulations, is my personal favorite despite having 2 lackluster cases in the middle, because the soundtrack is the best it's ever been. The first case, Turnabout Memories, presents its premise as such. Like, damn, this was such a shocker to me when I played it as a teenager. I was like, wait, Phoenix? My Phoenix? A suspect? What the fuck? How? It establishes how Mia and Phoenix originally met, with a young Phoenix being accused of killing a medical student, Doug Swallow, with Mia taking on his case as her second ever attempt. I especially enjoy young Phoenix for his brazen energy and the use of his cold to shy away from answering difficult questions. It honestly cracks me up every time without fail. The music feels the most emotional and climactic it's ever felt. For example, the courtroom lobby music feels appropriately dread-filled and almost gothic, with a consistent beeping on the left audio channel and some sustained chords, as well as a lead melody that dances up and down the composition, accompanied by an occasional haunting organ and some occasional bell hits. Once the trial begins, the music continues with an uneasy theme, as the arpeggio-esque melody wavers between descending and ascending notes to denote a sense of peril, like a prisoner facing their inevitable death sentence. I'm not sure if there's a term for the style in which a repeated pedal note will contrast with another interjected melody as it scales upward and downward in a dramatic fashion, but it's known most commonly in the context of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which I assume had to be some sort of stylistic inspiration for the motif of Trials and Tribulations. The cross-examination music, Questioning, Moderato 2004, elicits an almost pained response as a result of the shrill dominant notes, with some gentle piano notes accenting the song, and some reverb-heavy secondary notes accompanying the eventual looming sustained organ notes that further paint the doom and gloom motif this game has yet to fully realize. The Objection 2004 theme is especially reminiscent of the original Ace Attorney game, with plucky, optimistic notes and some consistent drum hi-hats that become selectively scarce during the B section. The entire principle behind this song is known as call and response, in which one section will play and ask a question uninterrupted, and the supporting notes will answer. I especially enjoy the final 4 notes of the bass line that seem to bring resolution before looping back to the beginning. It's a track truly befitting of the setting in which it's typically used, as most objection music is the audio embodiment of a light bulb in Phoenix's mind. Everyone in the courtroom just realized he gained the upper hand, and is rapidly narrowing down the possibilities and hunting down the righteous verdict. The Allegro version of the song Questioning 2004 might be my favorite track in Phoenix Wright history, as it continues the same questioning notes with a lead melody 2 octaves higher than the original, before shifting to a B section with a melody that climbs higher and higher, painting a painful picture of the truth nearly being exposed, as if Mia knows she's doing the right thing but also being afraid of what catastrophic revelation awaits them beneath the lies. All of this is complemented by the punctuation resulting from the various courtroom sound effects which aid to heighten the suspense and histrionics of the moment. Telling the Truth 2004 is a grim piece that beckons the player to feel the full gravity of the defense attorney's words, as it once again ascends in pitch with long sustained organ notes backing the track as a drum and hi-hat gradually make their presence known. I'm always impressed by how dramatic and genius this solo portion of the song is, like the killer is descending into madness, realizing their chance of an acquittal is growing slimmer by the second, forced to face the music and give up their freedom to atone for their crimes. And lastly, we're left with this game's version of Cornered, titled Pressing Pursuit, Caught, which has a staccato electronic buzzing underlying the track, with an ascending organ yet again supplementing the intensely perilous sounding notes, leading up to the glorious chorus, featuring a lead synth that wavers with the slightest bit of vibrato, adding a human-like element to the melody as the percussion clamors every which way on the sidelines. It's truly the perfect confrontation music, as the bittersweet joy of catching the criminal red-handed and then rubbing it in their face is captured perfectly in the confidently ascending pitch, reflected in both the dominant and supporting melodies as the song reaches its crescendo. The song could also reflect the mental framing of the killer, who realizes they've been caught, as their mind races to look for a way out but ultimately realizes the futility of such hope. But it almost strikes me as an over-the-top heroic theme you might hear in a Kamen Rider episode. The song Victory, Endless Victory plays when the defendant is declared not guilty, and it has a really chipper, reassuring melody, with every instrument, including the bass line, rising in a hopeful pitch, as if to tell the defendant, I know you're a bit shaken up, but everything's going to be all right. The second episode, Stolen Turnabout, involves a heist surrounding the antics of a famed phantom thief known as Mask Damask, who almost immediately turns out to be the self-admitted Ron Delight, who effeminately screams when he isn't given the attention he craves, as well as his chuckle-inducing tendency to trail off at the end of his sentences. The other interesting character is Luke Atme, which, if his name isn't enough of a giveaway, is a detective that desperately wants to be in the spotlight. He personally cracks me up, partially because his fast-paced waltz theme song matches his appearance and personality to a T, appropriately titled, I Just Want Love. This is also where the players will encounter the mysterious Godot, a Cyclops-esque prosecutor with a penchant for drinking 17 cups of coffee per trial and who has a really cool, aloof, poetic nature to him, always speaking in exaggerated metaphors and giving everyone condescending nicknames as if he's some untouchable anime protagonist. At one point in the game, Godot gets caught in a lie and this is how he responds, which makes him a very endearing character to combat. We also see the return of Larry Butts from the first game, who now has his own theme, titled When Something Smells, It's Usually Me. Every time I hear it, I feel the overwhelming urge to do a goofy dance. The third episode, Recipe for Turnabout, is an interesting but ultimately tedious episode centered around Maggie Bird, the defendant from the first episode of Justice for All, having once again been accused of murder, in which the episode begins with Phoenix appearing to lose a court case miserably before it's revealed that he was actually impersonated by a red-skinned lookalike with a Brooklyn accent and a penchant for angrily roaring like a tiger, hence the name Furio Tigre. Once you get him in the court, everyone starts cowering from him in a highly entertaining way. This is also the case in which the 2004-based internet meme humor will probably emit an audible groan for anyone old enough to remember that "This is Sparta" meme from the movie 300. I don't like this case primarily because the game makes it really obvious from the get-go who the killer is, and I prefer episodes that have you scrambling to figure out the details for yourself and ending in a big surprise reveal, since knowing the killer's identity makes the entire episode a formality about figuring out how to just indict him. Although I'm quite fond of the theme song for Victor Kudo, an old-fashioned Japanese geezer, whose theme immediately establishes his personality and temperament. Even if you had no idea what this guy was saying, his theme song painfully spells out his curmudgeonly traditional ways. The fourth episode, Turnabout Beginnings, catalogs Mia's courtroom debut as she has to defend a literal felon named Terry Falls, who might be one of my favorite dumb characters in the series. He has the mind of a child and he'll often gnaw on his ball and chain restraint in moments of frustration. He also has this recurring phrase that always makes me chuckle when combined with his remorseful looking expression. I won't won't talk about this in depth because it ends in a highly memorable and bittersweet fashion, but let's just say it's in my top 5 moments of the franchise. The emotional soundtrack is especially fitting, given the dire straits everyone find themselves in, and it really adds to the sense of hopelessness present in this episode. The final episode, Bridge to the Turnabout, begins with Maya reading an article from the paranormal-oriented Cult magazine, telling Nick she desperately wants him to join. Initially, he's reluctant as a result of the cold February weather, but upon looking closer and seeing the visage of a shrine maiden bearing an identical resemblance to his college girlfriend Dahlia Hawthorne, decides to brave the frozen downpour to find answers. It's a very twisting, turning sort of storyline that relies heavily on occult themings and an oriental shrine setting, while promising to explain Godot's mysterious origin. But I found myself enjoying it less compared to the final episode of Justice for All, but for people who like Godot, they'll either love it or absolutely hate it, especially since this is the last time you'll ever see him in the series. From this point on, they made a bunch of different titles that I hope to see remastered as well in the future, including, as previously mentioned, Apollo Justice and Miles Edgeworth Ace Investigations, which both happen to be some of my personal favorites on top of this trilogy. Apollo Justice has a very synthetic electronic sound to the music, which fit thematically since it was the very first Ace Attorney game to be made solely for the DS, as opposed to the only enhancement being the final case of the first game. It stars a young, naive defense attorney with a quail-like hairstyle who looks up to Phoenix Wright, and immediately begins with a compelling premise, which the story trailer illustrates quite nicely.
異議ありはい驚き宝介は大丈夫です彼がそんなことをするはずがない
One of his funny quirks is his tendency to yell, "I'm fine!" to project an air of confidence, which usually ends up confusing people who are just asking for his name. I also enjoy how his cornered theme has this hopeful, uplifting, bright future sort of feeling to it, like he's the reluctant hero in spite of his lack of confidence. He also has a unique gameplay mechanic that allows him to use his special bracelet to peer into the witness's body language as time slows down to a crawl, letting you examine odd nervous habits and use them to find hidden messages in their testimony. Gotcha! The Miles Edgeworth games have a more intellectual, refined spin, as you're not a defense attorney as much as a sharp-minded observer, gathering evidence and confronting criminals one-on-one. But my god, the soundtrack is excellent in every way. So I hope everyone goes out and buys the trilogy if they haven't already, so we can tell Capcom with our wallets that we want more of that delicious courtroom action on modern consoles. Like I said, I bought it on 3 separate consoles and I've almost completed all the achievements, so pick up your sword and fight alongside me in this battle to show Capcom we're willing to put our money where our collective demographical mouth is. In closing, Phoenix Wright is one of my favorite game series of all time. It not only manages to breathe a fresh air into the world of visual novels and video games as a whole, but it does so in a graceful way that appeals to adults and kids alike. The soundtrack will stick with me until the day that I die. The characters will always remain in my memories, and the plot points and character arcs turn the series into something truly remarkable. I have to give serious props to Capcom for not only adding an immense breath of fresh air to the Monster Hunter series without caving to the usual loot box practices so commonplace in the market today, but also giving Resident Evil 2 an amazing remake, as well as giving us the thoroughly polished, campy experience known as Devil May Cry 5. Sure, they've had lots of controversy in the past with expensive fighting game DLC and the cursed Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries 3DS game, but they've shifted management since then. They're honestly my #1 game company at the moment, and I will continue to passionately and enthusiastically reward their customer-first attitude with my dollar bills. And if you think Phoenix Wright is a boring series that isn't worth your time, objection! You're not very smart.
Objection!
Objection!
Objection! Hold it!